Welcome to Homescreen. Today we're going to talk about Up, the Australian neobank. Hello again, and welcome to Homescreen by 11FS. I'm your host, Tunde and I'm joined by Simon Taylor of 11FS Consulting. Welcome, Simon.
Thanks for having me.
If you didn't watch the first few episodes, you can check it out either on 11FS's YouTube page or on David Breer's Twitter account. Brief reminder of what Homescreen is. Today we give you, and every week we give you the opportunity to get behind the paywall of our platform that is Pulse, where we have 2,000 plus user journeys from fintechs and incumbent apps all over from all over the world. And each week we take one or a few and just have a real deep dive and talk about sort of the UI implications or just the market implications of these journeys. So today we're talking about Up. Brief introduction on who Up are, an Australian fintech which allows you to open a current account in 2 minutes. It's a product of the Bendigo and Adelaide incumbent banks. And just before we get into a deep dive with these journeys, I wanted to pick your brain, Simon, about sort of the Australian markets. Historically, Australia has lagged behind the UK in terms of banking, until very recently dominated by the big four incumbents. Up until 2017, Australian regulators sort of came in and said, you know what, I see what these guys are doing over in the UK. Let's now try and put forward this kind of restricted banking license framework that we have over here. So I want to get your opinion on sort of like where you see things are, how things have developed, and what these new legislations means for the Australian market.
Yeah, so as some of the viewers will know, sort of the Dexter Cousins of the world, shout out, and Rob Finley of the world, shout out, guys, know the market far better than me. But what I can say from our experience of when the Prudential Regulation Authority in the UK and the Bank of England released the license with restrictions in 2016, we saw a wave of sort of challenger banks come and take that path. And then from that 3 years on, 4 years on, you now see these organizations are household names with millions of customers. And I think you see this very similar model starting to emerge in the Australian market. And whilst it is dominated by the four, there's been a history of community banks there and many others who may look to take the advantage. Challenges like Zinger and Volt, and of course, Up. Now, when you said I was coming to talk about Up, I thought, does that mean I get balloons? Can I talk about a Disney movie? I was really excited. But actually, there's a real opportunity there, I think. And some of the things I see certainly look pretty exciting. So I'm excited to see what Up are up to.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you picked on sort of the influx of challenger banks that we saw when the legislation changed over here. And we're now seeing like almost a replication of similar models. We're seeing Volt take the similar co-creation path that Tandem took, and 86400 are using the whole we're going to wait until the license is fully given to us, similar to how Starlink did it as well.
Yeah, and then you see Zinger, I believe, kind of going the more, is it the prepaid card route? I might be wrong there. So it almost is like history repeating itself. The three different routes to market are sort of playing out. And to be honest with you, there's pros and cons to each of those approaches.
And I think that's a good segue into sort of the journeys that we're looking at here. So what we can see is that there is a lot of catching up to do, but there is a wealth of experiences for people to learn from, whether it's just the models or the journeys themselves. First journey we'll go into is the transactions monthly overview, your typical transactions page. But what I really like here is how you go into this sort of monthly oversight from this transactions page. And it's something which I haven't seen before. It's a small iteration, but something that I feel like adds a little bit more value by sort of littering a bit of PFM from the very off.
You would see this in a Revolut, a Monzo, a Starling. It has become quite common to have that sort of spend control and categorization. How are they actually getting into this? Is this displayed here in sort of the transaction feed? So I'm looking at my activity, and actually almost one of the transactions itself is that ability to drill in.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting that it's not a transaction, but it's an event trigger. How do you feel about that from a design perspective? Should I be jumping off from my transaction feed into an activity, or is my transaction feed more purely, these are your transactions?
I think when you take a look at the screen estate that this sort of design pattern is taking, it's not too much, and I feel like because it's not too intrusive, it is a nice kind of trigger point to go into. It's a nice place to kind of find that, hey, look, I have been spending this amount this month, and even just the little sort of metadata that you can get of the number of purchases you've made, the overall amount you spent this month. I think it's a very nice, well-placed design pattern, and I think it doesn't hinder your ability to see the rest of your transactions.
So the entry point you're quite comfortable with. And have you seen other entry points? Are there pros, cons to different entry point approaches?
To be honest, this is actually the first I've actually seen it done like this. So, and I think everyone is quite used to sort of going to like a PFM or an insights page to find out like their monthly overviews.
Because the classic design pattern of overview, insight, foresight sort of thing. This is a jump off point from that oversight into insight, and it's kind of drilling you down and helping you engage further with the application. So you're comfortable with the entry point. I think for me, I'm not sold on it, but then I've never used it. I'm only seeing the video on it, so we'll see if users love it. So how do you feel about then once we're getting into sort of the kind of the transactions overview itself?
Yeah, so for me, this was, I like the data that was presented here. I think with information like money in and money out, I think this is an opportunity where you can be a lot more sort of visual. You can really help sort of show people as opposed to tell people how much money you're spending. And Monzo have like an amazing feature, very subtle, that it's almost just this drag down from the top where you can see like all your spendings for the month, but just in like a bar chart, red for outgoings, green for incomings. And I feel like this is an opportunity where you could, and I don't know why they haven't, because I think in our next user journey, we see them again. You see them using sort of that data kind of visualization with bar charts on terms of merchant spending insights as well. So I feel this will be a good opportunity.
So there's a couple of things that strike me here. I love the category insights, good life, personal. It feels human. It's really nice and human. But yeah, the money in, money out thing. I know for the colorblind and accessibility standpoint, not using color can be useful. But at the same time, it feels almost unfinished. It's sort of it's showing me everything. And it's clean, but it feels like it's UX heavy, and the visual design side of it maybe just needs a little polish.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you on that. And with that, I think a nice way to go into sort of our next journey, which is our transactions monthly overview. And here you get as I said, you can get into your sort of generic transactions page very, very seamlessly, and you just see them scrolling through the transactions. But like for me, where it becomes really cool is where you enter into your merchant, your payment. And I think the jump off point again here is that you are able to go from seeing what you spent on something, and then furthermore an insight onto that spending. And for me, that's like a really cool way, another really cool jump off point to get into sort of more PFM and deep dive data.
It's interesting though that there was two sort of pieces there. There's the drill into the transaction, and then there's drill into the merchant, rather than sort of displaying that all in one place. Again, do I need the two screens? Is there an advantage to limiting the amount of data where I'm drilling into the transaction and serving maybe 80% of the use cases, and then allowing somebody to drill further down? Or would you just not hide that as a scroll and have it further down on the page maybe?
Interesting, because I think with a transactions page, what you're trying to get across is like this very light touch overview of how I've been spending. And if you do include information like the URL of the merchant that you spent with, or
the geolocation.
The geolocation, which are stuff that might be important for, let's say, receipts or back spending, and even just some small information they have there, like maintenance and improvement, which I believe is the category they've placed that particular merchant in. I think that's something that if you place on a transaction page might be a bit overbearing. So you can see why someone would light touch and then allow you to sort of go into then. And I think for me personally, it's really cool that they allow you to take a deeper dive into like the insights on that particular merchant, which is something that I personally haven't seen before done in this way.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, what would you take away from this, and have you seen it from the incumbents very often? Because the incumbents, certainly in the UK, and forgive me, Rob, forgive me, Dexter, I don't know, and I need to go look this up on Pulse, clearly. I don't know if the incumbents in Australia have started to do that yet, where you see them starting to, in their transaction feed, start to include merchant logos, start to include geolocation. This is almost stripping back and keeping the utility and moving away from the sort of gimmicky edge of it. Do you expect that they'd maybe, kind of see value in introducing those features if I were an incumbent in Australia? Is it going to be a competitive advantage? Do you think it's something that customers are going to want?
So are you talking about the transactions page with sort of the user in
the transactions page and then the ability to drill down further into it?
Yeah, got you. So I think this is something that we've seen that we've become used to over here in Europe and in the UK, and I think it's the same kind of people using these apps over there in Australia. So I think it is something that, as we've seen, everyone have to sort of pick up their boots and catch up over here. I think it's something that we're going to see incumbents have to do out there in Australia as well.
I think it's a design pattern that's pretty clear and easy to, well, I say easy, it depends what your app design and infrastructure looks like, I suppose. But it's something that from a perspective of there's a design pattern out there, customers seem to love it, therefore you would assume it's a no-brainer to start to include that. It's an interesting one to watch, and certainly it is something whereby we've seen the incumbent banks here start to do that more, so maybe we'll see more of that from Australia.
Hopefully so. And this now leads us into, to be honest, my personal favourite part of, what you have here is generic payments page. You just have like an overview of like the payments, and then they allow you to enter Pay ID, which is like this really amazing thing where you can pay someone based off their email address, number, or I think it is just email address and number. I believe organization name is something you're allowed to enter as well. Which is,
if we stop there for a second, Pay ID is this really interesting, piece that a number in India you've got Paytm on the national payments infrastructure, sorry, Paytm and. Forget the name of their underlying infrastructure, but there's been similar initiatives. And in the UK, we had Paytm. Paytm never really took off. There's similar examples in the Nordics with Swish and Vips, and we've seen a number of countries start to do this. I think fundamentally, the UK failed. Paytm hasn't worked. There isn't an interoperable way to use your phone number or your email address to easily contact you. And apps, more like the US market, apps have filled that gap. In Australia, actually, I think they're taking a bit of a lead here. This is certainly something that I haven't yet seen everywhere, and I haven't seen take over. But as a user experience, the way that Up have done this is absolutely fantastic.
And what we're also seeing there is that this kind of lesson learned from not just challenger banks, but I'm guessing design in general, where you're having these like small, concise steps where you're not overloading people with too much large, chunky form data. It's enter the Pay ID, then after you enter the Pay ID, then enter the contact's name, as opposed to like these big forms we're kind of used to seeing.
You're seeing all of the things you have to input historically, whereas here you're just seeing the one thing I have to input. Then I click go, and then the next thing comes up, and it's kind of using that screen real estate much more efficiently and not overloading the user as much.
100%. And then like my favorite part is where you kind of go into this Osco payment platform, Osco payment section, and then you're allowed to sort of tell how much you're going to send to the user, and then add a little message, and then the interface that they use afterwards. For me, it's subtle, but it's a little bit of genius, because I feel like when you think about payments between you and a friend, it is a conversation, it is a transaction between the two of you, much like messages kind of thing. And I feel like this chat-inspired interface that they have here is like small, subtle, but I am a big fan of it.
Edgar, can we play that video again, just for the benefit of everybody that's watching? Because I think if you just imagine what Tunde's been talking about there, like we can sort of see all of it. So we're going into the Pay ID that we talked about, and then once we've gotten into the Pay ID and we've entered a Pay ID, where very quickly that's all we can see, and then we very quickly move on from there to enter the amount, and it's really sort of keeping it simple, and the creative of contact, keeping it simple. And this is your Osco point here of like enter the amount and enter the message. That's nice, but again, all of the screen real estate is taken up for this payment. It's stripped right back, and then when you confirm the payment, what do you see? You see this obviously authenticate, and then here's this chat-like interface. So why did this stand out to you?
Like I said, I feel like it adds this element of humanity to sort of sending payments. If I want to make a joke with my friend, like, oh, here's your blooming money back, kind of thing. It becomes this like really human interaction, as opposed to this like transactional process that we're used to. And I feel like even just listing it out in this manner becomes very very, very human.
Well, because we've seen some of the big techs try and come the other way. Of course, Tencent and WeChat, and then every other chat application on the planet. So Facebook for some time have been trying to get payments to work inside their platform, increasingly through India, but also now in developed markets as well. And of course, Australia is a market geographically quite close to what you see in China and some of the super apps. So there's some similarity here. But I love that point you make about, well, actually, rather than going from the big tech to the banking, going from the banking towards chat is a really interesting place to be, to have a very brief conversation about money and what's it for.
And there is a UX heuristic that talks about that. You know, using interfaces that users are like more familiar with it. Firstly, helps them not having to learn how to get in touch with this new way of using things, and also it just gives a sense of familiarity for users to kind of like get their heads around.
Exciting stuff. So, what would you be taking away from this? If somebody says go build the payments capability tomorrow, come look at our payments capability, would you be tempted to sort of trial something like this and kind of keep it as an idea? And is there anything you didn't like about it?
This payments, particular payments. No, I think what we've seen is that they've sort of built on this foundation that like a lot of the European, UK challenger banks have started on, and I think those are trial and tested patterns that we've now become accustomed to. So I think what they have done isn't deviating too far from that. I think what we're seeing from a lot of the Australians is now this like, okay, we understand that we have a lot to catch up on now. Where we
can almost leapfrog.
Yeah, where we make our difference is how we innovate on design. Where we kind of make our statement is how we innovate on design, and we're seeing things like that from Ginger, for example. Not out. I don't believe that they're out yet, but from what we see there, they have this like really amazing lock card function. You could check it out on their website. Really cool, really creative lock card function. Very well illustrated, very well animated. And I feel like for me, to go back to your original question, taking a look at payments and what Up has done, I think, I'd definitely be willing to trial it out, because I think it's an innovation on what we've seen already and what we've become used to. So now, let's see where we can go next with design.
I guess much like how China leapfrogged cards, to a lesser extent, Australia has the now the advantage of having seen what's worked for fintechs and challengers in the UK and in Europe, and going, well, actually, some of that works, but actually, are there other creative things that we could do differently? And I think that's a really good example of it. I mean, my own sort of gut reaction looking at this is their stripped back style has pros and cons. On the one hand, from a sort of simplicity when you're in the chat payment standpoint, it really makes sense. But from the ability to understand how am I managing my spending, have I been paid? Has that bill gone out? Did it really work? There's some questions about the transaction feed I have, but there's pros and cons on either side, right? And it's ultimately about what a customer's going to love.
100%. Anyway, I think this is all we have time for today. To summarize, what we're seeing from these Australian markets is really good. And like I said, Ginger, Volt, and 86400 are really sort of making good strides into the market. And I think we haven't even, with open banking still not available, we haven't even seen where the roof can be with these Australian incumbents. So I think there's still a lot of room for innovation. Simon, final words?
Final words. It's an exciting time to be in Australia right now. I think there's the real pieces of the puzzle to do something truly interesting, different, to take the lessons learned and actually really go and succeed. So never been a better time to work in finance in Australia, I think.
100%. Thank you guys for tuning in today, and thank you again, Simon, for joining us.
Thanks for doing this, Tunde. Well done.